Morning. Psalms talks about it, just as Tate just read. The idea that righteous people, old age, they continue to flourish and bear fruit. And that's what is said of Abraham. As for you, God says, you should go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Genesis 25 describes him and says, Abraham breathed his last and died in a ripe old age, an old man and satisfied with life. And he was gathered to his people. There's something beautiful about this idea that the progression that God offers as we age is one that is a good one, a good old age, not just an old age. Because typically these are the things that our culture and life associates with age, is that things begin to go wrong. Your body makes sounds that it didn't make before. It's harder to get up in the morning. People look at you differently, and they get nicknames for you like boomers and all sorts of things that the society gives to you at old age that would give you the sense that this is not necessarily a good thing. But that's not the way the Bible describes it. In fact, the biblical description of aging, and I'm going to talk about it in a generic sense because whatever age you leave this earth at, you are aging right now. So it really doesn't matter whether you leave this earth at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 or beyond. You are in the aging process right now. And the aging process is one that is intended to move us closer and closer to goodness, to being people who are of a ripe old age. Now, that's a phrase that you don't typically want somebody to say, oh, that person's ripe. But in the context here, what they mean by ripe is bearing fruit. When Abraham looked back on his life, he could say, I had been a cedar that had grown and grown. I had been a tree in God's orchard that had grown and grown and eventually bore fruit. Abraham could look back on his life and he would say, what God said is true. I will become a father of many nations. His life had meant something. And so he was satisfied with life. Not satisfied because it was always good days. Because it wasn't. Not satisfied because he'd done everything right. Because he hadn't. But satisfied because he could look back and say, my life meant something, it had purpose, and it was a good one. That's what Jesus offered. And it's meant to be a life that is used. Because if you want to be technical about it, aging is not for you. Paul would say to the Philippians, to live is Christ and to die is gain. Paul understood that his gain happened when he died. When he stopped aging, that's for him. The gain belonged to Paul. The life belonged to Christ. And so a good life, one where you can look back at it with satisfaction, whatever amount of time you have to age, is one where Christ has been seen in you. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about a battle, one battle, and then we're going to talk about a lot of privileges of aging. Because aging is a privilege. You may not hear that often, but aging is a privilege. The first one, though, is the battle. And if you don't understand the battle, you will lose the battle. Because it is the natural progression, if left unchecked, of all aging. In Ezra chapter 3, verse 12, we have a description of what happened when the foundation of the temple was laid a second time. So Solomon built the first temple, but there is what's sometimes referred to as the second temple period, a time period after they'd gone into Babylonian captivity, and now they came back. And the people come back to the land of Israel, they come back to Jerusalem, and they're going to rebuild the temple. But they are not lavishly rich like Solomon was. In the days of Solomon, silver was as if it were stones upon the ground. So to build, Solomon said, budget is no issue. Money is no object. Build the most lavish and luxurious and beautiful thing you can. Didn't have that option. So in the second temple period, Zerubbabel, a name that gives me terror every time I have to say it publicly, Zerubbabel led them to build the temple and lay its foundation. And when they laid it, it says after 70 years in captivity, most of the people who were there had never seen the old Solomonic temple. But there were a few. And it says, yet many of the priests and the Levites and the heads of fathers' households, these are the old people, the old men who had seen the first temple, they wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, while many shouted aloud for joy. There is this juxtaposition given in the book of Ezra between an older generation that remembers the day when the temple was made and there was not a stitch of it, not a corner that was not covered in gold. They remember it when everything was precious metal. And now they've got this new one and they know the difference. And so they weep. And I understand why they would weep. I mean, the comparison must have been so stark between the one that they had built in the second temple period and Solomon. But at the same time, what are the young people doing? They're shouting aloud for joy because for them, they have never had a temple. There has never been a place that they could go and make sacrifices to God. This is the beginning and the dawn of a new era. There is an idealism and an excitement and a happiness. And here's the interesting thing. When you continue in the account of Ezra, God says the people who are right are the young people. They're the right ones. Forget about the old. Move forward to the new. There is much to be excited about. In Ecclesiastes 7, verse 10, Solomon would say himself, do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. The tendency as we age is to look back and to compare the things of the past to the things of the future and to become cynical. Because things are always changing and there's always bad things happening. And we have a tendency to point to the past in our mind and repaint it as the glory days. And so the future is always dark, because if it bleeds, it leads. And the past is an ever-shimmering, growing thing of beauty. And so we become people who say, look at the world, and look at how bad it is. That is the battle of age. That is not from God. It is not God who wants you to do that. God is the one who says, rejoice always. And again I say, rejoice. It is in Ephesians chapter 4, down in verse 31, that Paul says, put away from yourself bitterness, and wrath, and anger, and clamor, and slander, but instead be kind to one another with a tender heart. So what cynicism is it is a heart that has been touched by bitterness and the struggles and the pains and the heartaches and the obstacles and the stumbling blocks and the problems of this world, and has said to itself, I'm going to shut my heart and it'll never be harmed again. It's one that has taken age and allowed time to harden it into something that cannot be used by God, and looks at the world in a very, very dark way. That's the battle. And if you will wage war in that battle, you'll be okay, because you know examples in your own life of both types. You know examples of grumpy old men. And you know examples of tender-hearted, sweet old ladies. And you can just deal with the fact that there's more sweet old ladies than there are sweet old men. I'm just here to give you the facts. It's just the way it is. But the reality is that you've seen it actually in both genders, right? there's two pathways with aging. And one leads you to cynicism and anger and bitterness. And the other one leads you to a good life, a ripe old age, satisfied with life. You've got to decide now. And by now, I mean, I don't care what age you are, because you're aging. You need to decide now, which one am I going to be? And if you don't decide, you have decided cynicism. To not make a decision is to make a decision in regards to this, because the world is a place full of darkness. It's not like it's a happy-go-lucky, rainbows and unicorns world. It isn't. There is lots and lots to be cynical about and angry about and frustrated over and hurt over and deeply hurt. Bad things happen to good people. And if you just let that wash over you without the context of what life is actually about, you will become cynical. So wage that war. Because as you age, you have quite a few privileges. And the first one is you have the privilege of practice and renewal. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 through 17, Paul will say, we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying. See, you could easily focus on the outer man, right? The aches, the pains, the trips to the doctor. If you are young and have not spent an afternoon in a doctor's office, followed by an evening in a doctor's office, followed by a breakfast that leads to a doctor's office, you don't know what this is yet. Though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. And he says, for momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal way to glory far beyond all comparison. Renewal is an interesting word. It means to make new again. It means that something is new, and then it's new, and then it's new, and then it's new, and then it's new. That's what renewal is. And I was putting this sermon together, and a friend of mine posted something to Facebook of a spiral staircase, and I said, that's it. You know, it was just a gift to me, this thing he posted. And he looked at a spiral staircase, and one vantage point was from above. And from above, when you're going around a spiral staircase, it just looks like you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And that's exactly what aging looks like. I'm just doing the same things over and over and over and over again. And sometimes you don't even feel like you're getting any better at those things. I do this thing that I've done before and I have the same problem. And I do this thing and I have the same problem. And you don't feel like you're getting any better. But if you change the vantage point, the spiral staircase isn't like this, is it? You're going up. And so you're renewed day by day by day. And actually, when you think of it like a spiral staircase, it makes sense why we call it light momentary affliction, because the truth is it's just one. And every single step has its own struggles and its own heartaches and its own difficulties. But each one is one step closer to where we want to be. Aging gives you the privilege of climbing the staircase. If I had died in my 20s, I would still be in heaven. I was a Christian in my 20s. I would be there. And I would have gained. But from my 20s to my 40s, the amount of opportunities I've had to climb the staircase is priceless. And I will tell you that as somebody who has fell on his can and gone down a few levels. Because sometimes you climb and then you go backwards. But it's still worth it. And I fully intend to keep that going. Because I know Christians who aren't in their 40s, they're in their 80s. And they have a look in their eye that I go, I want that. And I'm not there yet. Because they've seen things. And they've done things. And they've been through things. And they get it in their core in a way I don't get. In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 13 through 14, everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he is an infant. But solid food is for the mature who, because of practice, have their senses trained to discern good and evil. It takes practice to get good at things. But practice is what makes you move from infancy to adulthood. My youngest son, Art, his primary diet is still formula. Have you ever tasted that stuff? It is disgusting. It is nutrient-based. It is packed with all the things his little body needs to grow. If you've seen him, he loves formula. Big dude. Future linebacker, right? But that kid has no idea what the sizzle of steak is. He has no idea of the flavor combinations that can happen when you start moving beyond infancy into real culinary delights. Practice. Practice is what age gives you the opportunity to do, so that as you practice, you become accustomed to the word of righteousness. There's something beautiful about both learning what the word says at a deeper level so that you read things and you read passages that were always there, but now you read it with an eye that's gone up the staircase a bit and you go, oh, I didn't know that was there. It was there all along and I needed it and I was going to need it right now. There's something beautiful about becoming more and more accustomed to the word of righteousness. And there is something beautiful about living a life where that word has gone in you and now you're living it and practicing. And you fall down, but every once in a while you make a perfect swing. Every once in a while you stand at the three-point line and it just swishes through the hoop. Couldn't do that before. You watch little kids playing basketball, and they get up there with the basketball, and what's the first thing we do? We go, well, we're going to have to lower that hoop. Because they can't even get it up high enough. But those little kids, LeBron James was that little kid one day. Michael Jordan was that little kid one day. And then they grew. Practice is a blessing. It is a privilege of age. So the next time that you fall on your face as a Christian, I want you to give thanks for the fact that you have the privilege of doing it again and trying again and getting better. The next is the privilege of discernment. Hebrews chapter 5, we already read this verse that talks about the idea of practicing, but it says that if you do practice enough, your senses are trained to discern between good and evil. One of the things that happens with age that is a blessing is you can tell the difference between stuff. You begin to tell the difference between things that matter and things that don't. I am a different parent now than when my oldest was a baby. And part of that is just simply the time to go, oh, that matters and that doesn't. A day, if you ever get a chance to, don't ask her because it's embarrassing for me. But everything was a big deal when she was little. I was raising a 50-year-old child because that's how I treated her. I had expectation that everything had to be right and right now. And that's the life of a firstborn. And I'm a firstborn, and that's the way it goes. But you give it some time, and you start to, as a parent, kind of learn, oh, this thing is a big deal. This thing's not a big deal. Right? You see it in every area of life. The more experience you would get with something, the more you begin to go, this matters and this doesn't. Your spiritual life is that way too. You're going to find that there are things that matter and things that don't. There are things that I used to really stress about in my own spiritual growth that I don't anymore. There are things that I never stressed about in my spiritual life that now absolutely have my attention. Because I realized they mattered more than I thought they did. And that happens. That's a reason that the shepherds of the flock of a local congregation are supposed to be older men and not novices. Because as they're watching over the souls of other people, they're going to be watching over the souls of people who are messy. right? They make good choices, they make bad choices, and some of those bad choices are a big deal and some of them are not a big deal. And you got to choose your battles. You got to decide what's worth dealing with and what's worth letting go. When do you focus on justice? When do you put some emphasis on grace? And the funny thing is it's very hard for me to sit here and just tell you when to do which. You just got to go through it. And when you go through it, you get better at it. And you learn to discern between good and evil. You learn to tell the difference between what matters and what doesn't. And you begin to see the things that are of real value in life, the real gem. You know, Peter would say that of Christians, he says that we're of a like precious faith. I don't know that I can say I always think of my faith as a precious thing. I should. But I can't say that I always do count it as something very precious to me. But that's discernment. Discernment helps you to tell what matters and what doesn't. So that you go through life and somebody runs into your car. You used to really get worked up over it. The car. Just some stuff. The stock market goes up. You used to get really excited. Stock market goes down. You used to get really upset. As you're older, you start not paying attention at all. It'll work itself out. There is a process of discernment of what matters and what doesn't. Folks, it's all about people. Aging gives you that perspective. Because perspective is a huge part of what really matters in life. In Psalm 37, 23 through 25, it says, "The steps of a man are established by the Lord, and he delights in his way. When he falls, he will not be hurled headlong, because the Lord is the one who holds his hand. I've been young, now I'm old, yet I've not seen the righteous forsaken, or his descendants begging bread." Anxiety should be a young man's game. Notice how I said that. Anxiety should be a young man's game. Because when you're an old man and you've paid attention, what have you learned? What did David learn as he wrote Psalm 37? I've been young and now I'm old, and the thing I've learned is God takes care of his people. When I was young, it made a lot more sense to get anxious about things. How's this going to work out? How's it going to turn out? But look, think about David's life. He starts out as this younger brother in a family of shepherds. And then he goes and he survives bear and lion attacks. And then he defeats Goliath. And then he deals with the bigger enemy, which is not the enemy outside, the Goliath. It's the enemy inside. It's the Saul. And he deals with the envy and the strife and the jealousy and all those things that came there. And so he runs for his life and he hides in caves. And he has to deal with guys like Nabal. And he has to deal with all the problems that come with a life on the lam. And then in the end, what's he figure out? And I went through all that stuff and God took care of me every single time. Anxiety should be a young man's game. The purpose of aging, one of them, is for you and I to get through our thick skulls that the stuff that we think is going to sink our ship is not going to sink our ship if God is with us. You know, you read passages and the apostles say things like, if God is with us, who can stand against us? And you say, oh, that's a lovely passage when you're young. That belongs on a Hallmark card when you're young. You go and get the tattoo when you're an old man. Because you say, I've lived it. And I've seen it. And I know God will see me through. So much of our life is wasted on worry and anxiety. So much of our mental power is wasted on these things. Climb the staircase. Get closer to the top. Recognize that if you have Jesus with you, if you are a follower who lives by faith, if you cling to Him, the money things will take care of themselves. The health things will take care of themselves. The petty issues of mankind and the boss that you can't deal with because they're unreasonable will take care of itself. You just keep your eyes on the prize and it will be fine. Have the perspective. The next is patience. There are some things that you have to understand that if you pray for them, God does not hand them to you. Right? If you pray to God and you ask Him to give you something, sometimes God gives you the opportunity to get that thing. And patience is one of those. If you pray for patience, God has told you how you become patient. You go through trials, you go through difficulties, and you learn to get to the other side, and that makes you patient. And so when you pray for patience, expect this, that God will give you opportunities to learn to be patient. And some of you are thinking, well, I'm not going to be praying for that anymore. And I'm going to beg you to do it anyway. I'm going to beg you to do it anyways. Because God does not give bad gifts to His children. See, that's the fear. That's the control aspect. I'm not going to pray for this thing. God, make me a better person because I know what better person looks like. It looks like getting my teeth kicked in. But God doesn't give bad gifts to His children. You don't ask for bread and Him give you a stone. So I want you to keep praying for patience. Because at some point, what happens is you go through all that stuff and you actually have patience. And one of my favorite passages on that is in the book of Philemon. And it's one simple chapter. You have Paul writing to Philemon. And Paul is an apostle. And as an apostle, he can say what he wants, and people have to say, okay, how high and when can I come down? That's the power of an apostleship. Right? He's the boss. He's been sent by Jesus, and he has the authority to command people to do things. But in verse 8 and 9, when writing to Philemon, he says, therefore, though I have enough confidence in Christ to order you, I know I could. That's what he's saying. I know I could. I have enough confidence in Christ to order you. To order you to do what is proper. Yet for love's sake, I rather appeal to you, since I am such a person as Paul the aged, and now also a prisoner of Christ Jesus. The Paul that we first meet is a Paul who said, if you disagree with me, let me hold some people's coats while they stone you. That's the Paul you first meet. The Paul you're first introduced to says, this Christianity is something that is wrong. He's wrong about that. But he says, I know how I'm going to deal with somebody I disagree with. Give me some letters, let me go to Damascus, and I'm going to grab these people and drag them off into prison. We're going to put the thumbscrews on them until they figure out what they ought to do. That's the Paul you're first introduced to. But by the time he becomes Paul the aged, what does he say? I'm an apostle, I know the right thing to do here, and he is right. So not only has he gotten himself squared away, but he knows what Philemon should do. But he says, I'm not going to order you, but I'm going to appeal to you. That's a man with patience. That's a man with patience to understand that a free will offering is much more valuable than something done at the point of a gun. Paul understood that if Philemon would send Onesimus back to Paul, not because Paul said he had to, but because Philemon wanted to, what it would do relationally for Philemon and Onesimus, what it would do to glorify God in that a runaway slave was forgiven by the slave owner he ran away from. And what it would do for Onesimus in knowing that he had love from somebody who there was previously nothing but animosity. Paul understood if this is a free will offering, it's so much better than if I order you to. But it takes patience for that. I'll tell you, anybody can be a dictator. Anybody can play that game. Just give them a big enough hammer. But to become Paul the aged, you need to have patience. You need to have patience to understand that people's growth takes time. You need to have patience to actually help them along the journey of life so that they can age well, so that they won't grow bitter, so that they have hope for the future. Because ultimately, this is what God intends for us, is to be people like that. Because there's another privilege that comes with age. You have the privilege of a voice. You don't have a voice when you're young. You often think you do, but you don't actually have a voice. Young people with ideas and thoughts that they want to share with the world are a dime a dozen. Some young person who is convinced that they've got it all figured out, you'll see those every day. I think about the older preachers when I first showed up on the scene. And I knew how to run things. Just ask me. And they were so patient with me, and I think the reason was, young preachers who think they've got it all figured out, that's cute. We'll see the next one next week. Y'all got it figured out, don't you? The reality is that when you're young, you want a voice. You want to be respected. You want to be listened to. You want to be a leader. But you really don't get a lot of that to start with, because it's earned. Because you got to take the field trip before I'm going to let you be my tour guide. Because people realize that at the end of the day, the person you really want to be listening to is somebody who's successfully navigated those waters. I don't want a guy in charge of the till and moving the rudder of the ship who's never been there before and never dealt with those waters. I'm not interested in a guide into uncharted waters for him too. Don't know how to get there, let's just go. I want somebody who knows what they're doing. And God says that. Leviticus 19:32, you shall rise up before the gray-headed and honor the aged, and you shall revere your God, I am the Lord. And I do understand this, that we do live, and it is a tendency of culture sometimes to stop listening to older people. And that's one of the reasons that God commands it. It's because sometimes we forget to listen to older people because they give us warnings and we go, yeah, that was like it was, but that's not like it is now. So there is a warning there to younger people to consider the way of the gray-headed. But I'll also say that when you look at CEOs of companies, by and large, I know you can think of a couple of young ones. But the people who tend to run large companies are not young. The people who are in charge and leading nations tend to be older. As you age, you will have an opportunity to have a voice that you do not have now. What are you going to do with it? And if you do not put the work in now, as you age, you will not be prepared for the voice you will be given. And as much as it is true that a lot of the leaders of both our country and businesses and the world are older people, that doesn't mean they're all good leaders. Because some of them did not take advantage of the gift of aging, and they did not age well. Because that's the goal. You will have a voice. And when you have that voice, will you be somebody who is of a good old age? Will you be somebody who bears good fruit in your ripe old age? Your purpose on this planet is to live for Christ. You get your gain later. But as we age for Him. how would He want me to climb the staircase? If you're not a Christian yet, you're not even on the staircase. You haven't even put your feet on it yet. If you want to be upwardly climbing to glory and set your mind on the things above, it begins with Jesus. Every heavenly gift, every spiritual blessing is in Christ. And the way you get in Christ is through baptism. And it can't just be me grabbing you and shoving you under the water. As fun and exciting as that might be, that doesn't do the job. It has to be a commitment on your part. Christ died for you, not just us, for you. What are you going to do about that? If you are ready to commit your life to Him, to submit your life to Him, wait no longer as we stand and sing an invitation song.